Have you ever seen someone everyone else worshipped and you knew they were a monster? Have you ever been told to keep quiet, to leave it in God's hands, while watching your community crumble under the hands of a smiling devil? But before we go further, let me check in with you. How are you doing today? How's your family holding up? I hope your health is strong, your spirit is rested, and your home is full of peace. Now let me introduce you to Miss Bernice Taylor, a 68-year-old retired school teacher from Jackson, Mississippi. She's not flashy. She's not loud. She walks with a slight limp in her left leg and wears her gray, natural hair proudly like a silver crown earned through storms. To the world, she's just an old woman in a church hat. But what they didn't see, what they never expected, was that Bernice was sitting on a story. A truth. For 20 years, she wrote down every lie, every manipulation, every slap of power behind the pulpit. Her weapon, a plain brown leather-bound diary. And when the day came that Pastor Vernon Wallace, the man the town treated like Jesus himself, went too far, Bernice walked into that courtroom, and the war began. Jackson, Mississippi in the late 90s was a town split in two, not by geography, but by perception. On one side were the people who believed in tradition, faith, and public appearances. On the other were the people who saw the cracks under the surface, but were too tired, too afraid, or too beaten down to say anything about it. In the center of this carefully painted world sat True Rock Baptist Church, a red brick building that dominated Jefferson Street like a throne. Every Sunday, the parking lot overflowed. Men in pressed suits stood tall beside women in heels and fine hats, and the sound of gospel filled the air so loud you could hear it from 2 blocks over. Children wore their best shoes. Elders nodded in silent reverence. And at the head of it all stood Reverend Vernon Wallace. To the town, he was a blessing. He helped families pay rent, preached about strength in hard times, shook hands with politicians, and smiled with the confidence of a man convinced he spoke directly with God. But Miss Bernice Taylor had seen something different. She had taught in the school system for over 35 years. English literature, African American history. Generations of students passed through her hands. She was known for her discipline, her patience, and her fairness. But when she retired, she turned her full attention to the church she had attended for most of her adult life. She joined committees, helped organize the choir, worked on literacy programs. That's when she began noticing the patterns. At first, it was subtle. Vernon would dismiss certain women during meetings with a smooth, "You wouldn't understand, sweetheart." He never said it to the men. He'd hold his gaze a second too long on the teenage girls. And he seemed to have an odd relationship with the church, funds collecting money for repairs that never happened, missions that never left the ground. Then came the whispers. A young woman named Kendra, who used to sing in the choir, left town suddenly. Another Yolanda showed up one Sunday with bruises she blamed on a fall. Vernon prayed over her and dismissed her tears with a pat on the head. Bernice noticed, and more than that, she wrote it down. Every small conversation, every suspicious expense, every time Vernon counseled a troubled young woman in his private office, behind locked doors. It went into the diary she kept hidden behind old school papers in her file cabinet. She wasn't trying to stir up trouble, not at first. She just believed in keeping truth alive, even if only on paper, even if no one ever read it. The town didn't see Vernon the way she did. To them, he was the one who organized voter registration drives, who paid for Thanksgiving turkeys, who held hands and sang during funerals. And in truth, he did all those things. But that was only half the story. The other half was about control. You could feel it in church meetings how no one dared question him, even when something didn't add up. People deferred, apologized, laughed nervously around him. He'd look at someone with those sharp gray eyes and tilt his head and the room would go quiet. Even grown men seemed to shrink in his presence. And Miss Bernice? Well, they tolerated her, respected her even, but they also thought she was just an old teacher long past her prime with nothing to do but meddle. That's how Vernon liked it. He let her fuss and take notes at meetings, assuming she was harmless, an old lady with too much time on her hands, until he made his mistake. It happened during a church anniversary dinner, the kind where everybody dressed up and ate fried catfish and collard greens off plastic plates in the fellowship hall. The choir had sung, the deacons had prayed, and Vernon had delivered one of his fiery speeches about obedience and loyalty. At the end, he pulled Bernice aside. What he said to her was soft, controlled, and meant to stay between them. Something like, "You know, Sister Taylor, some people don't know when to stay in their place. You were a teacher once, not a judge. God deals with those who overstep." It might not sound like much, but the look in his eyes, the slight clench of his jaw, that was a threat. And Bernice, she went home that night, opened her diary, and for the first time in 20 years, wrote something not just for the record, but in preparation. "He's slipping. He thinks I'm scared. He's wrong." A month later, Kendra returned to town. She was pregnant, and she was ready to talk. That was the final spark. Bernice took her diary-copied pages, gathered statements, printed emails, and brought it to Assistant DA Caleb Morgan, a young white prosecutor fresh out of law school who didn't know the town politics and didn't care. He saw the evidence and agreed there was a case here. The whispers in the town turned to murmurs, then into full-blown rumors. "Did you hear Bernice is taking Vernon to court? She lost her mind. God don't like ugly. She's just bitter old women always get like that." But Bernice walked tall. Every Sunday she still showed up. To church, sat in the fourth pew from the front and looked Vernon dead in the eye during his sermons. When the court date was announced, it felt like a funeral bell ringing through the community. People chose sides. Some stayed silent. Others got angry. A few, the brave ones, started to come forward. By the time the trial began, the courtroom was full. News trucks parked outside. Everyone wanted to know. Could a retired teacher bring down the most powerful man in town? And Bernice, she just sat there quietly in her navy blue suit, her diary on the table in front of her, hands folded, ready. The courthouse buzzed like a beehive. Folks who hadn't stepped foot in a courtroom in 20 years suddenly had business there. Everyone wore their Sunday best. Even folks who hadn't been to church in years were lined up to get inside some, just to watch others, to silently root for their side. Inside, the air was thick. Judge Willard, a wiry, no-nonsense black man in his early 60s, presided over the case with a steady hand. He knew what this trial meant to Jackson. This wasn't just a legal matter. This was a reckoning. Pastor Vernon Wallace sat beside his high-priced defense attorney, Gregory Langston, a smooth-talking white man from Memphis who specialized in high-profile cases. He was the kind of man who wore cufflinks that probably cost more than most people's rent, and he knew exactly how to twist a story. Langston's opening statement was short and cutting. This is a case of an elderly woman confusing her personal bitterness for justice. There is no evidence of abuse, only interpretation. What we are witnessing is the persecution of a man who has given his life to God by someone who has never forgiven him for not choosing her. Bernice didn't flinch. She expected as much, but the look on some of the jurors' faces stung. Doubt, suspicion, that slow poisoning of credibility. It was Vernon's greatest weapon, doubt. He didn't need people to believe in him completely. He just needed them to question her. The first few days of testimony were hard. People from the church came forward to support Vernon, deacons, secretaries, even some of the choir members. He's always been respectful to me. I've never seen anything inappropriate. Miss Taylor, she's always been a little intense. Bernice sat hands folded, jaw clenched. She didn't cry, but inside she felt each testimony like a stone on her chest. She knew these people. She'd fed them, taught their children, prayed beside them, and now they looked past her like she was a stranger. But the tide began to turn when Kendra Simmons took the stand. Now 32, with a baby girl at home and fire in her voice, Kendra didn't hold back. I was 17. I went to Pastor Wallace for help with college applications. I thought he was guiding me. Instead, he told me God had revealed that I was meant to serve him. He said intimacy was a form of obedience. The room went silent. Even Vernon's face twitched. Kendra recounted how she'd left town ashamed after she found herself pregnant and was told to keep quiet or face the wrath of the Lord. Her testimony was backed by dated letters, one of which Vernon had written with his own signature, promising to support her in secret. Langston tried to rattle her. He brought up her past, a shoplifting charge when she was 19, a failed marriage, a counseling stint. But she didn't break. None of that changes what he did. And you can look down on me all you want, but I'm not the one who hid behind a pulpit while hurting people. More murmurs in the courtroom. Langston seemed agitated. Next came Yolanda Harris, the one with the bruises. She had always denied any abuse back then, but now with Bernice at her side, she had courage. She testified that Vernon had grabbed her arm during a disagreement about funds. When she tried to leave the church committee, he told her God would strike her family. She stayed out of fear. Bernice had documented it all and even had emails Yolanda had written to her, never sent but saved. They were submitted into evidence. Vernon's mask began to slip. Then came the diary. 2 decades worth of entries, all handwritten, time-stamped, descriptions of conversations, events, dates, names, pages where Bernice wrote what others said. They were too afraid to speak aloud. Langston objected to its relevance. Judge Willard allowed it. Bernice took the stand, her voice calm but firm. She read selected passages aloud. February 12, 2004. Vernon dismissed Sister Louise in front of the committee. Said she should stick to casserole duty. She cried in the parking lot. June 3, 2011, Vernon took $1,200 from the choir fund for a youth trip that never happened. I asked for receipts. He said, "Let me handle the Lord's money, teacher." April 9th, 2018. Kendra came to my door. Pregnant. Scared. Said Vernon told her she was chosen. She asked if she was going to hell. I said no. I said she was not the problem. He was. Each line hit like a hammer. The courtroom wasn't silent anymore. It shifted. People leaned forward. Eyes widened. Even some of Vernon's closest supporters looked shaken. But it wasn't over. Vernon's defense tried one last move. They brought up Bernice's own past. A broken engagement. A complaint from a parent when she disciplined a student too harshly back in 1986. Langston smirked as he asked, "Is it possible, Miss Taylor, that your diary is less a document of truth and more a catalog of personal grudges?" Bernice didn't blink. "You can think what you want, but the truth don't change just because somebody wants it to look prettier." She looked straight at the jury. "I didn't come here to destroy a man. I came here to protect the people he destroyed." There was no thunder, no applause, just silence. Heavy, holy silence. Outside the courthouse, things got messy. Church members fought in parking lots, families argued at dinner tables. Someone threw a brick through Bernice's living room window. She kept going. The pressure mounted. The trial was reaching its boiling point. Inside, Pastor Vernon still wore his smile, but it was cracking. And Bernice, she was tired, but ready. It was the 9th day of the trial when the courtroom hit a standstill. Everybody expected more of the same testimony, cross-examination, drawn-out objections. Folks were getting tired, ready to return to their routines, even if it meant swallowing the whole mess down and moving on. But that day, that Thursday morning, brought a surprise no one was prepared for. The courtroom was already packed when the bailiff announced a new witness had come forward, Ezekiel Zeke Barnes, 42, a former youth minister at True Rock Baptist. Nobody had seen him in Jackson for over a decade. Whispers ran through the crowd like wildfire. Zeke had vanished back in 2012, and the story was always the same. He moved north for better opportunities. Now he was walking up the aisle in worn boots, a too big suit, and eyes full of storm. He nodded briefly at Bernice, then took the stand. The air shifted. The prosecutor, Caleb Morgan, kept his voice low steady. "Mr. Barnes, why did you leave Jackson in 2012? Zeke's voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken about this in years. "Because I saw what I wasn't supposed to see. And when I tried to speak up, Pastor Wallace said God didn't forgive snitches. Said if I stayed, I'd be buried in rumors so deep I wouldn't be able to show my face in my own hometown." He reached into a worn leather folder and handed over a flash drive. "This is the backup of all the church emails I had access to, from 2008 to 2012. I made copies before I left. I was scared, but I couldn't just let it go." Langston immediately objected, claimed it was fabricated, claimed it was digital hearsay. But Judge Willard overruled. The contents were reviewed over lunch break by a tech analyst from the DA's office, verified. Real emails with real timestamps. When court resumed, the screen at the front of the room came alive. There in black and white were Vernon Wallace's emails. Cold, arrogant, dangerous. "She's young, but she listens. I've told her she's called. I need to guide her personally, keep the committee out of it. Tell Bernice to back off. She's not clergy, and her interference is starting to cause noise. God doesn't require explanations, he requires loyalty. Remind Yolanda." The jury read them with stony faces. The silence was deafening. Bernice didn't smile. She didn't nod. She simply held her hands together on the table, breathing slow like someone watching a storm roll in just as they expected. Langston scrambled. He claimed context manipulation as spiritual metaphors, every kind of excuse the trained tongue could find. But the damage was done. When Vernon finally took the stand in his own defense, the mask was gone. He still spoke with confidence, still wore the language of the pulpit like armor, but the cracks showed. These people misunderstood my words. They twisted my guidance into something it never was. These women were fragile, emotional. I was their spiritual father. Sometimes that means being tough. Sometimes that means not explaining every decision to the doubters. The prosecution pounced. Mr. Wallace, is it pastoral leadership to tell a young woman that her body is an offering? Is it church policy to move money without record or receipt? Is it the job of a shepherd to silence the injured sheep? Wallace bristled. His charm, once effortless, now looked desperate. His words, once smooth, now defensive. And then came the moment that cracked the courtroom in half. Caleb Morgan held up the diary, not Bernice's, but a second one. We recently received a journal from another young woman who left this town 8 years ago. She died of an overdose last year. Her sister sent this in last night. He opened to a page and read, he said obedience was love. That doubt was sin. I was 17. He said my body was a temple and he was the high priest. The courtroom gasped. People who had sat on the fence, who'd whispered in corners and kept their hands clean, finally saw it. Not bitterness, not vengeance. Pattern. Langston stood up and asked for a recess. His voice was shaking. Outside the courthouse, someone from the congregation left a single white rose on Bernice's windshield. No name, no note. Inside, Vernon's supporters had begun to thin. People who once shouted "Amen" when he spoke now avoided eye contact. Bernice walked to the water fountain in the hallway, her steps slow, deliberate. She sipped once, then turned to Zeke. Took a lot to come back. He nodded, eyes red. Took more for you to stay. That night, news anchors from Jackson to Memphis ran stories on the trial of the pastor. The internet lit up with hashtags. The black church community nationwide split some in defense, many in reckoning. For the first time in 20 years, the truth wasn't confined to the pages of a diary. It was out in the open. On the 12th day of the trial, everything came to a head. The courtroom was fuller than ever, standing room only. Some people brought folding chairs. Others stood in the hallway, just hoping to hear the final word. News cameras were outside like vultures waiting for a moment of flesh. Even the governor's office had called to request transcripts. Inside, Pastor Vernon Wallace sat like a man who finally knew the end had arrived. His posture was different now, not broken but smaller, still trying to cling to his dignity, but you could see in his eyes that the armor had cracked. The jury had been dismissed to deliberate the night before. Nobody knew how long it would take. Bernice Taylor sat quietly at her usual spot, front table, diary to the side, her fingers gently folded in prayer. She wasn't praying for vengeance. She wasn't even praying for justice anymore. She was praying for the truth to finally be enough. When the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a verdict, the room inhaled all at once and didn't breathe again until Judge Willard returned to the bench. The jury foreman, a middle-aged black woman with calm eyes and trembling lips, stood with a paper in her hand. In the matter of the state of Mississippi versus Reverend Vernon Wallace, we the jury find the defendant. She paused. Guilty on all charges. Gasps, cries, shouts. Some folks clapped. Others wept. 2 older women in the third pew began singing, "I Won't Complain" under their breath. It wasn't rehearsed. It was what their grandmothers had done when the Lord delivered. Vernon sat motionless, lips parted just slightly. No words, no outburst. Just the look of a man who finally realized he couldn't talk his way out of this one. Judge Willard banged his gavel and called for order. Sentencing will occur in 30 days. In the meantime, the defendant is remanded to custody. The bailiff placed handcuffs on Vernon's wrists. Not roughly. No anger, just finality. And then, as if it were all arranged by fate, Bernice stood up. She turned toward Vernon as they escorted him down the aisle, and for a moment he looked at her. "You'll regret this," he muttered. Her response was quiet but sharp as a blade. "No. I regretted staying silent for 20 years. I'm finally free." That moment, when their eyes met, the abuser cuffed the teacher unbowed. It was like the final chapter of a long, painful gospel. People whispered her name as she left the building. Some nodded in reverence. Others couldn't look her in the eye, but none of them could deny what she had done. And for the first time in decades, Bernice Taylor walked out into the sunlight, shoulders high, with no secrets left behind. Back at home, her answering machine was full. People calling to apologize, to confess, to thank her. A few still left angry messages. Old habits die hard in small towns. But one voice stood out, a young woman, nervous, soft-spoken. "Miss Taylor, I don't know if you remember me. My name's Ciara. I used to be in your 5th grade class. I just wanted to say thank you for being brave, for standing up for people like me. You taught me how to write, and now I'm writing everything down too." Bernice sat down at her kitchen table. She opened her diary to a new page, wrote a single line. "The war's over, but the story's not finished." 2 days later, she returned to True Rock Baptist Church. Yes, she went back. People were stunned when they saw her walk up those front steps. Some expected a scene, but Bernice didn't come for drama. She came to worship. The sanctuary was half full, the pulpit empty, but Bernice sat in her same spot, 4th pew from the front right side, and when the choir began to sing "His Eye is on the Sparrow," she joined in. A few others did too. The church didn't collapse, the walls didn't fall, but something did change. A truth had been spoken, and now there was room for healing. Later that week, Judge Willard stopped her outside the Piggly Wiggly. "Miss Taylor," he said, "I don't normally say this to citizens, but you changed this town. You broke a silence that was older than all of us." She smiled gently. "I just turned the page, Your Honor. It's time for the next chapter." In the days following the verdict, Jackson moved like a town trying to find its footing after an earthquake. Folks were still going to work, school buses still made their rounds, but something in the air had shifted. A kind of hush, like after a thunderstorm when you're not sure if the rain is done yet. True Rock Baptist Church closed for a week for prayer and reflection. The deacons released a statement calling for healing and a recommitment to transparency. But for many, it was too little too late. The once full pews were now half empty. But the biggest change wasn't in the church. It was in the people. Women who'd once smiled politely through Vernon's sermons were now speaking louder in meetings. Men who had stayed quiet out of fear began asking questions about money, about leadership, about accountability. And at the center of it all was Miss Bernice Taylor. People approached her in the grocery store, at the library, on her morning walks. Some came to thank her, others just cried and said nothing at all. And some, like Deacon Charles Wills, came to apologize. "Bernice, I didn't see it. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. I thought, if I just stayed in my lane, it'd all work out." Bernice nodded. "That's how silence works, Charles. It convinces good people to stay seated while the house burns." He looked down, ashamed. "What do we do now? We rebuild. We let the ones who've been silenced lead for once, and we remember this time." Meanwhile, the media frenzy died down. The news vans left. The hashtags faded. But the story lingered. Caleb Morgan, the young prosecutor, received offers from larger cities, Atlanta, D.C., even New York. But he stayed. "There's more work to do here," he told the local paper. "People like Miss Taylor don't come around often. And when they do, they deserve a justice system that backs them." Zeke Barnes, the former youth minister, opened a small counseling center on Farley Street, quiet, humble, dedicated to helping survivors of religious abuse. "It ain't therapy," he told a local reporter. "It's just a place to talk, to breathe." And Kendra Simmons, now raising her daughter Hope on her own, began organizing monthly support circles for women at risk. She called the group the Sparrow Circle, in honor of the song they sang the day Vernon fell. Bernice joined the first meeting. She didn't talk much. She just sat, listened, and took notes in a brand new journal, this one with a blue cover and gold trim. This one, she said, is for what comes after. One Sunday afternoon, Bernice was invited to speak at Jackson's Community Center. The room was filled with young people, students, activists, future teachers. She wore her Sunday best, a long navy skirt, white blouse, pearl earrings. When she took the mic, the room quieted like church. Some of y'all think justice looks like a courtroom. Sometimes it does, but more often, it looks like a woman writing in the dark while the world ignores her. Justice isn't loud, it's persistent. It's that quiet knocking that don't stop until the door finally opens. A young woman in the back raised her hand. "Weren't you scared? Like really scared?" Bernice smiled. "Baby, I was terrified every single day, but I was more scared of what would happen if I stayed quiet." That evening, she returned home, made a pot of tea, and sat in her favorite rocking chair on the porch. The sky was painted pink and gold, cicadas humming in the distance. Her neighbor, Miss Viola, came by with a sweet potato pie and tears in her eyes. "You made it through the fire, Bernice." Bernice said, smiling softly, "and I didn't even smell like smoke." They sat in silence for a long while, listening to the breeze move through the trees. Weeks passed. Then one morning, Bernice received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, "No return address." Inside, folded neatly, was a photograph, one she hadn't seen in years. A church picnic, 2003. Vernon smiling beside her, hand on her shoulder, the sun catching his wedding band. On the back of the photo was a single sentence. You never did belong behind anyone. Bernice stared at it for a long time. Then she folded it, placed it in the back of her new journal and wrote, "Chapter closed. Next one begins." A year after the trial, Jackson, Mississippi was not the same city it had been. The streets looked familiar. The buildings hadn't changed, but the conversations, they were louder, clearer, no longer whispered. At True Rock Baptist Church, Sunday service still started at 11, but it had a new rhythm. There was no longer a single man behind the pulpit. Instead, a rotating ministry team led by Reverend Arlisa James, the first woman ever to preach full-time from that platform. She didn't wear flashy robes. She wore a gray suit, sensible heels, and a determined smile. And when she preached, it wasn't with fear, it was with freedom. On her first Sunday, she looked out at the congregation and said, "We're not here to cover up pain anymore. We're here to name it, heal it, and never let it grow in silence again." People cried that morning, and not out of grief but relief. Meanwhile, the Sparrow Circle grew. Kendra had started with 5 women in a borrowed church basement. Now, over 60 attended each month, and not just from Jackson. Folks drove in from Greenville, Clarksdale, even parts of Alabama and Louisiana. Some were survivors, others were daughters of survivors, a few were just looking for answers. Bernice never missed a meeting. She didn't always speak. Sometimes she just listened, scribbled in her new journal, but when she did speak, the room got still like the hush before a holy word. "Don't let anybody tell you healing is quiet," she said one night. "It's loud, messy, and it don't wait for permission." Zeke Barnes volunteered to lead workshops on trauma recovery. Yolanda started a mentorship program for young girls. And even some of the old True Rock members, those who had doubted Bernice, once showed up to help. Because healing, Bernice always said, required participation. At the Jackson School Board, her name came up again. Not because she had reapplied, not because she asked, but because a group of former students now grown educated and working in the social work, law, and education submitted a petition. "We want to rename Eastside Middle School after Miss Bernice Taylor," the letter read, "because she taught us how to think, how to stand, and how to write when nobody wanted to hear it." The vote passed unanimously. The ceremony was small, just family, friends, and former students. Bernice stood beneath the new school sign, her hair now fully white, her frame a little slower, but her spirit unshaken. "I taught here 35 years, she said into the mic, "and not once did I imagine my name would be on the building. But I hope the children who walk through these doors know their names, their voices, and their stories matter, from the first page to the last." The crowd stood, clapped, cheered, some cried. And at home, Bernice's life was simple and sacred. She tended her little garden, she drank peppermint tea in the afternoons. She kept her journals stacked neatly by the window. Sometimes she'd reread them not out of pride, but out of remembrance. She still got letters, emails, phone calls, some from people she knew, some from strangers. "You gave me the courage to tell my father what my uncle did. Because of you, I left my abusive pastor and found a new faith. I started writing my own diary. I think you'd be proud." She saved everyone. One warm spring morning, a little girl knocked on her door. Couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Big eyes, hair, and 2 puffs, holding a manila envelope. "Are you Miss Taylor?" she asked. "I am. My mom said you helped her. She wanted me to give you this." Inside was a drawing a tree with 100 little hearts for leaves. And in the middle of the trunk was a tiny figure drawn in pencil holding a book. Below it, in uneven handwriting, "Because of you, my mama is safe, thank you." Bernice sat on her porch that night longer than usual. Stars above, crickets singing, the ache in her knees softened by the warmth in her chest. She looked out into the stillness and whispered, "Lord, I thought my story was just mine, but you turned it into 1,000. Across town, Pastor Vernon Wallace sat in a prison chapel. He wasn't the center of attention anymore. No more robes, no congregation, just one of many. He led Bible study some days, talked about repentance, but his words didn't carry the same echo. He'd written to Bernice once, a short letter. "You were right. I was wrong. I hope God shows mercy." She never wrote back, but she prayed, quietly. Not for vengeance, but for transformation, the kind that starts where pride ends. The women of Jackson began telling their stories more often now. At churches, schools, cookouts, hair salons. The silence had been broken, the page had turned. And at the heart of it all, there remained a woman, no cape, no spotlight, just a retired teacher with a diary, and the courage to use it. What do you do when the person everyone else calls a savior is really the one doing the harm? What do you do when no one believes you? Not your neighbors, not your friends, not even your church. You write, you remember, you keep the truth alive until someone is ready to hear it. Bernice Taylor was never trying to be a hero. She wasn't out for attention. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't crazy. She was a woman who had spent her life teaching other people's children to read, to question, to stand up straight. And when the time came, she followed her own lesson plan. She stood, not with a microphone, not with a protest sign, but with a worn-out leather diary, a quiet faith, and a determination that said, "You may try to silence me, but you will not erase me." That's the power of Black women. We endure, we carry, we watch. And when the time is right, we speak, not for revenge, but for the healing of generations, for the daughters, for the granddaughters, for every one of us who was told to smile and sit still. This story isn't just about Bernice, it's about you, your aunties, your mama, your sisters. It's about all of us who were told our voices were too loud, too much, too disruptive, when really our voices were the only thing holding truth together. So now I ask you, what will you do with what you just read? Will you sit quietly, or will you share the message? Will you support the women in your life who are still gathering the strength to speak? Will you tell your truth even if your voice shakes? Because somewhere out there, another Bernice is writing, another Kendra is deciding whether to come home, another Hope is waiting to grow up in a world where she doesn't have to be afraid. Let's make sure they know they're not alone. If this story moved you, share and comment below. Tell us your thoughts. Tell us your story. And don't forget to subscribe to the Black Women channel, where we tell stories that need to be heard. Your voice matters. Your story matters. We are listening.